Contrary to popular belief, closing doesn't just happen at the end of a sales meeting. You're actually beginning your close the moment you meet someone and shake their hand, and you're closing throughout the entire conversation until you eventually ask for the business at the end. And to further illustrate this point, I'm gonna share with you 5 extremely powerful closing tips that you can use from the beginning of a sales meeting all the way until the end so that you can start turning total strangers into paying customers. What's going on, everybody? Patrick Ding here. Before we get started, make sure to give this video a like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, as I said before, in any sales meeting, you're actually closing throughout the entire sales conversation, right? So it's not just the very ending where you actually ask for the business. It's all the little things that you do from the beginning, middle, and end so that when you actually do ask for the business towards the end of the meeting, you actually have already done all the heavy lifting. So once you make that ask for the customer to actually sign a contract or something like that, well, it's very easy for them to say yes because you did all the work ahead of time. So let's go ahead and dive into these tips so that you can start closing more deals. Now, the first tip that I have for you is you're gonna wanna be perceived as better by being perceived as different. Now, for example, if you're selling, let's say, a commodity service that every other person can do, for example, a lead generation agency, a Facebook marketing agency, right? Like these kind of things that anyone can learn online and offer services. Well, you know, when you're trying to sell to potential prospects, they're gonna ask you, okay, what makes you different from everybody else, right? And you know, for a lot of people, they don't think too much about what makes them different, what makes them unique, and why should a prospect go with them instead of going with their competitor. So how you wanna think about this is to be perceived as better, you wanna be perceived first as different, right? So people naturally perceive different as better. It may not always be true, right? Different doesn't mean you actually provide a better service, but in the minds of people do believe that, you know, someone who's different can be better, and so you gotta start the conversation in that way. So you wanna think of ways to differentiate yourself from other people. For example, do you offer different case studies of people that you helped in the past, and you know, you can increase the likelihood of getting success for your future client? Do you have better communication skills, and are you easier to work with compared to other people? Is your product and service actually better, right? Is there a significant improvement, like a 2x, 3x times better? Or are you 30% better, 50% better, right? Because depending on your industry and your margins and things like that, you know, just being a little bit better, that slight advantage can mean the difference between closing a deal and not. Another example might be, do you educate your customers and consult them and help them through their challenges versus just trying to sell them some product and service and walking away, right? So the selling experience is one way to differentiate yourself from other people, because obviously if someone interacts with a salesperson, that salesperson, you know, really shares insight and show that they care about the prospect even before signing a deal, that's very valuable. Or it could be that your product and service is actually just better, and you know, it's a no-brainer for a prospect to go with you versus anybody else, right? So no matter what it is you're selling, you have to, you know, sit down and write down all the things that make you different from everybody else. And then when you start finding those differences and those things that make you different and unique, you can start incorporating that into the way you pitch your product and services. And so once you start pitching that way, you know, right from the get, people are going to think you are better and different from your competitors, so that if you're perceived as unique and you're perceived as better, you know, better experience, better product and service, whatever the case is, by the time you ask for the deal at the end, they already think that you're better than your competitor, so it's a lot more easier to close deals. But like I said before, all this work is done from the beginning and the middle of the sales meeting, not necessarily just at the very end. Now, the next closing tip I have for you is you wanna get your clients to invest emotionally into your products and services, right? So in B2C, business to consumer, you know, selling everyday things, and even business to business, where a business is selling to another business, you gotta understand people are always buying emotionally, right? You would think, some people might think that, you know, because a business is selling to another business, it's all logic and they're just looking at the numbers. That's not true at all, actually. People make their decisions emotionally, even in B2B settings, and they're going to justify that decision logically. So the numbers have to make sense, but people have to feel invested in your solution, and they have to really feel that you're gonna get them the result. Very important. So the biggest sales challenge that I see, you know, a lot of people starting in sales make is that they're positioning their product or service as a nice to have. So I'll give you an example. One of my students that I'm helping out, they are selling a software in a specific industry, And what they are specifically doing is they're basically going after companies that have been around for a long time, who are using old legacy software. And what they're doing is they're selling a software to replace that legacy software and move this customer into the cloud. It's very similar to what I was doing when I was working at Oracle, where I would sell to hospitals who are using old legacy software, and we would just move them over to the cloud, right? Very natural transition. So for this person, they were positioning their product and service as a nice to have. What does that mean? Well, if this person went to pitch, their ideal customer, they would say like, oh, our software does this and that, here's the features, here are the benefits, here's why you should switch, and blah, blah, blah. But nobody's really that interested in what they have to offer. And the reason, as I started to dive deeper into this, was because it was a nice to have. The way my student was pitching this software, well, people didn't really see the urgency to make that switch into the cloud, right? What was the point? Is it gonna save them time? Is it gonna save them money? There wasn't a really clear value proposition. And also, it seemed like buying the software and putting in all that work wasn't really worth the reward at the end. So a lot of people just weren't responding to the cold outreach, and it was difficult to generate any sales. So as I looked into it, I realized that the problem was not necessarily the software, because the software itself does have value, saves them time, saves them money. And I started to ask more questions to this person. And this person said, so one of the questions I asked was, well, if a company bought your software and they implemented it and they moved over to the cloud, well, how much time would that save versus doing it the old way they're currently doing? And I was expecting my student to say, oh, maybe a couple hours per week. But this person said, well, if they purchase my software, they're gonna literally save months of time. So I was like, wait a minute. So you're telling me that if this person buys your software, they're literally going to save months of their employees' time, so the employee doesn't have to work on administrative tasks and they can actually do other things and let software do all the work? And you calculate how much a company is paying their employees, and we're talking tens of thousands of dollars saved just from implementing the software. So clearly a nice value proposition when you look at it from that perspective, right? You're saving the person time. If the company purchases your software, they're saving time, they're saving money, and their employees are a lot happier because they don't get stuck doing administrative work and they can actually do the job that they were hired to do, which is probably something more important, right? So now we're positioning their nice to have as something that they must have and they must do right now, because why wouldn't you? Why are you just throwing money and time out the window, right? And so how you get people to invest emotionally is you get them to understand the problems. What problems are people currently facing? In this case, the ideal customer would be wasting so much money, wasting so much time, and not really maximizing their employees. And by not maximizing their employees, well, they're not making as much money as they could because they're not putting enough energy into generating more sales, right? Now, there's a lot of variables coming into play, but the main point is that change your positioning from a nice to have to you absolutely must have this right now. And how do we get this done as soon as possible, right? So you want to make that clear distinction from turning something from nice to have to must have. Now, the next step we have is you're going to want to get the prospect to invest logically, right? So like I said, emotion is very important. People have to emotionally feel the pain and understand why they should buy right now. Logically, it needs to make sense, right? Because you can't just get someone to buy emotionally, because either they're gonna regret their decision and it's not gonna really make sense for their business. Or number two, when they try to, let's say you're selling to a larger organization, it's not just one decision maker who makes a decision. They're gonna go back to their team and be like, hey, Patrick is telling me about this software that can save us time and money and blah, 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 blah. Well, when the decision-making board takes a look at what that software actually is, if it doesn't really make sense on paper, they're not going to buy. And the reason is because just because you get one person emotionally invested, it doesn't mean everybody else is invested. And sometimes some decision makers don't even want to show up to the meeting unless they look at it from a logical perspective and they see like, okay, I can see the value in this. Let me have a meeting with Patrick to make sure this is right for us. Now, for all of that to actually happen, what you are selling has to logically make sense on paper when people write it down and they have meetings about what you're selling without you actually being there, right? And that happens, right? A salesperson is not always going to be in the room to persuade everyone. What you're offering has to hold up even if you're not in the room. So logically, when you're selling, let's say a software, for example, it has to have some kind of value, right? So let's say a software costs, I don't know, $10,000 per year for, a subscription. Well, if something's gonna cost $10,000 per year, well, it better be saving them more money than they're spending, or it could be saving them a lot of time. If you save an employee's time, well, they can focus on other parts of the business, so you're actually saving money in a way, right? Or it's got to be helping them make more money in some way, right? These are just some obvious examples of what software can do, but depending on what you're selling, it could be something more intangible like branding that you can't necessarily see a immediate ROI on, right, for example. So whatever it is that you're selling, logically, it's got to make sense on paper, and people have to perceive what you're selling as value, right? Ideally, your product and service would want to be valued higher than what you're asking for, so people would think like, oh, it's a no-brainer, right? We're giving him $1, he's giving us $2 back. So that's pretty much how you want to position your product and service logically to make sure it's sound on paper. The next tip I have for you is you want to handle objections early on in the conversation. Now, a lot of salespeople out there, they typically don't like to handle objections until the very end of the sales meeting or the very end of the sales cycle. And the problem with this is that if you do not handle the objections in the beginning or early on, and you wait for the end, you're gonna go through the entire sales process, and at the end, you might find that the prospect's not even qualified to buy because you never went through the objections, because maybe some people are a little too afraid to get that no, and so they do all this work hoping to get that yes. It's kind of like you do all this work and then the prospect just feels like they should just buy just because they went through the process. The reality is, even if people go through that work, if they don't feel like they should buy, they're not gonna buy. So if you know what the common objections are in your industry for the product and service you're selling, you're gonna want to bring them up towards the beginning or the middle of the conversation, and you don't want to leave it always towards the very end of the sales cycle, because you need to understand what these objections are and how you can overcome them in the beginning, right? So if you know, for example, that a lot of the people that you're talking to, they just don't have the budget, right? Well, if you go through an entire sales process, a presentation, and all those things, and you find out at the end, the prospect doesn't even have the budget to buy, what was the whole point of doing the entire sales process anyways, right? So in that case, you gotta understand if the prospect has a budget in the beginning to see if you should even spend time with them to move them along the sales process, right? That's just one example, but there's many different factors or many different objections that you might experience in your sales cycle, right? And by handling those objections in the beginning, you increase your odds of the prospect closing at the end, right? Think about it like this. If you already know what all the common objections are that people are going to have, well, if you talk about them throughout the entire conversation and you handle them one by one and you're just knocking them down, by the end of the sales cycle, when it's time for you to ask for the deal and it's time for the client to actually sign the contract and send you money, well, you already handle all the objections. So there's no objections left, and it's gonna be much more easier when you ask for the sale. If you leave all the objections for the end, what's gonna happen is that you're gonna have to go through all these hoops before somebody actually buys. So you would rather go through the objections in the beginning and be upfront and transparent about that and make it easier for yourself in the end. Again, heavy lifting in the beginning to make the end easier. And the next tip I have for you is you're gonna wanna understand how the prospect wants to be closed. Now, depending on what you're selling, you might be targeting different ideal customer profiles, right? And so different type of customers, different type of clients like to be closed differently. So if you are selling into enterprise, each enterprise has their own different way of buying something. There might be different approval processes. They might want to have certain type of meetings and demonstrations. The way they negotiate might be different, right? So, there are similarities between customers within an ideal customer profile. However, you gotta understand, you can't expect everyone to close a deal in the same way. Some people like to go fast and they just need a couple meetings before they make a decision. Other people like to take a very long time with lots of demonstrations before you actually close. So by understanding that people want to be closed differently, well, you basically can tailor the way you pitch and close for that specific person to align with the way they close, right? So what I'm saying is that if you understand that a large enterprise company is not going to be closed in one phone call, don't try to close them on that one phone call. That would be pretty off, and they would be like, why are you trying to push so hard on the first call? We have all these approval processes that you're not respecting, right? Because if you try to close on the first call, when the person can't do that, like literally just cannot do that because there's so much approval processes, then you kind of shoot yourself in the foot. And let's say, for example, if somebody wants to be closed on the first call and they don't want to spend so much time doing all these meetings, if you don't know that and you're like, okay, now we're gonna schedule this meeting and this meeting and this meeting, but they just wanna close the deal right there, then you're also gonna shoot yourself in the foot because you're not understanding how the prospect wants to be closed. So the easiest way to understand this is, especially if you're starting out in sales and you're not really sure how people wanna be closed quite yet, is you ask your prospects how would they like to be closed. So towards the end of the meeting, what you say is you say, okay, look, it seems like everything is going great so far, and it seems like we're a good fit to work with each other. Now, I'm just curious to understand, if we were to get this deal done, what would it look like on your end? What would need to happen internally at your company for us to move forward with something like this? So you're not saying that you're gonna close them right there. You're not really saying anything. All you're doing is asking a question to understand how they would like to be closed. Typically, what a company would do, especially if they're a larger organization, is they would just tell you. They will say, okay, first I need to talk to this person, then we need to have a meeting about this, and then we gotta have a presentation about this, and then what's gonna happen is we have to go through procurement, right? And so they're gonna tell you all the different steps that need to happen before they close the deal. And as they are saying all these things, you're just writing it down, taking notes. And so once you have their entire buying cycle written down and you understand what it takes to get a deal done at their company, you create a timeline. So this is, one of the advanced techniques for sales. It's that you have to understand how people want to be closed first, and then you want to put a timeline essentially to each one of these steps. So let's say, step number 1, they need to talk to their boss, whatever. So the first item might be, okay, so you say you need to talk to your boss. I'm just curious to know when that meeting is actually going to happen. Then they're going to say, oh, probably sometime this week. And you can say, okay, so I can expect it to be done this Friday? Yeah, sure, Patrick. And so you make a note, okay, I'll go ahead and make a note about that. And after you talk to your boss, you said that you need to have another meeting with me and your boss and everyone else involved. Is that right? They say, yeah, that's exactly right, Patrick. Okay, great. So when would you like to have that meeting? Well, when do you think? They'd be like, sometime next week. Say, okay, well, for me, next week, Wednesday, 10 a.m. works pretty well. You mind if I go ahead and schedule a meeting for that time? And then we can, further discuss about that. They'll be like, okay, yeah, that's fine. I'll go ahead and invite my boss to that. Then you go to the next step and you say, okay, well, after that meeting, you would want a presentation, right? Obviously that's gonna be a little bit further out after we have our, our second initial meeting. But, just curious to know when exactly is that going to happen if you were to give it a ballpark. Then they will say, okay, probably the week after that. So you say, okay, so 2 weeks from now we have a presentation. I'll go ahead and write that down. So we're both on the same page. And so you don't have to get a specific date for every single item point because you don't know if you're even gonna get there because there's many steps, but you need to have some kind of timeline on when each thing is going to happen. By doing that, if anything is too far out or like the prospect is feeling like they're dragging on too much time when the sales cycle should be shorter, you could say things like, oh, well, you're saying that you want to do this 3 weeks from now, but why would it need to be done 3 weeks from now? Do you think we can get it done within the week? This way we can save some time for both of us. And so you start shortening that sales cycle while you're on that call. So if you have their timeline and you know how someone wants to be closed, when you actually close them, it's so much easier because you're both on the same page. You both want to get all the steps done on an appropriate amount of time. You both agree on that time because they're the one that's telling you everything. You're not forcing anything on them. And so you just walk step by step by step. Eventually, you're just going to close the deal because they told you how they want to be closed. And so with that said, those are going to be some of my best tips that you can use to make your close a lot easier by doing the work up front. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And if you want to take your sales game to the next level, I got a free training. Link is in the description on how to sell anything to anyone. So make sure to check that out. With that said, my name is Patrick Dang, and I'll see you guys in the next one.